I'm just going to give Mike one more moment, and if for some reason he's delayed, I will take over the slides and open them up for you. So thank you for your patience. We'll just wait about 1 or 2 more minutes. Michael, I'm just reposting the survey for the attendance. I will post it again about in about 30 minutes. No worries, but thank you for posting that. Well, perhaps Mike is delayed, so I'm going to attempt to introduce myself in this format, and then bring up the PowerPoint slides, which will unfortunately make me not be able to see your chat, but I'm sure Mike will be joining us soon. I'm Julie Jodwin-Krozik. I'm the current Director of Disability Services, and I'm really excited. We have about 23 people in the room today, and we have had over 100 faculty and staff take this UDL training. It's a really nice opportunity given our switch to and pivot to the remote world to make sure we're all on the same page with intentionality around inclusive approaches to working with students and making things accessible online. So if you give me a moment, I am, this is one of my least favorite things to do. I am going to attempt to use Collaborate, which I don't use every day. And I'm sure many of you feel the same way if it's not something you've been doing all the time. But I will attempt to share my PowerPoint slides with you. So just give me a moment. And is that showing up on your screens?
Yeah, we can see it, Julie.
Great, good. That's probably the most nerve-wracking part of my day. Now I'll move on. And again, I'm sure Mike Murphy will be joining us shortly. So what I would like to be able to do is just get started. Can you see the screen that is only the slide, or are you seeing the slide with the notes and the preview of the next slide?
Just the slide, Julie.
Wonderful.
Just the slide.
Magic. Excellent. So again, I cannot see the chat feature in this view, and normally we have 2 people in here who is monitoring that. So if you need to stop me, please just start talking and interrupt me. Please don't raise your hand because I cannot see it in this view. Today we're hoping, and I'm saying we because Mike will be joining us, we're hoping to get through a few goals. One is that we would like to provide a basic understanding of the principles of UDL, or Universal Design for Learning. In doing that, we will also be trying to outline and sample a few tips. So one thing, by talking about the objectives of this workshop up front, we're also modeling how you might do that in your classes. You may already talk about the objectives for your whole course, objective for a particular lesson. This also helps students by reinforcing the purpose of the lesson, and it can help them with their focus and maintaining their engagement. Secondly, we're hoping to explain the components of UDL. What is a universally designed instruction? And then we'd like to introduce new ideas for assessing your curriculums using some of these principles of universal design. And then we'd like to explore more resources and how to bring them into our practice. So what is universal design for learning? You know, theoretically, it's an approach, a set of principles for curriculum development that really opens up opportunities for individuals across a wide range to have more opportunity to learn, equal opportunities or access. One thing that we've done on this slide intentionally is that we have used a hyperlink in curriculum. And you can see that listed. We are intentionally not underlining other material that may be important, which is a great habit we all have of underlining important material. But now that that is distinctive to being a hyperlink, we're going to intentionally use it only for that purpose. And then we're going to take the text of the hyperlink here, where a student can scroll over and then be brought to another location or a website or an article or a PDF. We're going to intentionally make that hyperlink contextualized and using words within the sentence, as opposed to posting a very long website address or whatnot. It's still here. I can hover over it. I can see where it's going to send me. But if I happen to have a disability, for example, I would also be able to have my screen reader tell me that this is a hyperlink. And if I wanted to, if I was going through, I could also tab from hyperlink to hyperlink if I was really looking to see where the screen would bring me. So I'll try to interject a few tips along the way. Again, UDL provides us this blueprint for thinking about our curriculum design and creating instructional goals, methods, materials, and assessments that can really work for a wide range of individuals instead of having a more traditional one-size-fits-all approach. Now, of course, across the state, we're talking about equity, inclusion. There's a statewide equity inclusion agenda. You've seen many different graphics around equity and equality, but again, we just need to remind ourselves that everything that is equal is not always what someone needs. So true equity, many times, is giving someone what they need to access the curriculum or to have an equal opportunity. And this graphic here displays that. We have also intentionally added alternative text or tags in the pictures that we put into this PowerPoint. So if you, as a student, were downloading these slides and trying to go through them with a screen reader, let's say you had vision loss, for example, you would also be able to know whether or not the picture that was displayed is something that has text that you would need to really be able to utilize and access, or for perhaps it was just a descriptive picture that's emphasizing the same information that's on the screen. And if you're using Microsoft products, they will, if you put on the accessibility checkers or checklists, they'll remind you how to do these things along the way. And there are tips that can be really helpful, even if you're feeling alone at home designing material. Our site lab is always there with instructional designers ready to assist, but sometimes a quick Google search for accessibility checklists will give you a hand too. You may have heard me say this many times, but really the most fundamentally concrete way to think about why universal design is to think about where it comes from. And as the disability movement certainly grew and advocates were able to advocate and fight for accessibility and rights that were really legislated but not necessarily followed, and it were many times unfunded mandates in the past, we have found that something is what seems like it should be simple, like retrofitting an older building, for example, a town hall, you know, that was built 100 years ago, didn't have the thought about individuals with disabilities ever even needing to go into the building, let alone having that be a focus of the design. When they've attempted to retrofit, let's say, a restroom in a building like that, it's quite expensive. It's quite difficult to create stalls that are wide enough for someone using a wheelchair, to have handrail at the right height. Many times they need to retrofit the height of a counter, where the paper towel dispensers are, the number of stalls, having enough room for someone to ambulate and really turn in their wheelchair. But in doing that, once they are able to retrofit the restroom, they can find that that restroom now meets the needs of a range of people, not just that one citizen who might be in a wheelchair, but individuals who have other disabilities, who might have a personal care attendant with them, individuals with a stroller, with a baby and a toddler, you know, on one hip, and a shopping bag and a purse who needs a little extra room. Someone of a different height, stature, someone using crutches. Lots of different reasons why that extra space has now become extremely convenient for more people. And that type of approach, architects have owned, and it's become a part of architecture and design. But we are applying that to our instruction and curriculum design when we're thinking about universal design for learning. So being proactive to think about how to include more students, how to reduce barriers that currently exist or that we may be unintentionally creating, and to move forward to open up opportunities for more students, and in the long run, reduce the need for general accommodations for the range of students with disabilities that you do have in your classes. So in terms of our second goal, and really talking about the foundation here, universal design for learning is also instead not just the right thing to do or a wonderful idea, it's also grounded in some scientific research around learning, neural works, and in how we learn. This work primarily has been founded by CAST, which is an organization outside of Cambridge here in Massachusetts. We're really lucky to have them in our backyard. They're not just nationally known, they're globally known for the work that they do in K-12 and in higher ed. And one of the ways to think about this rationale as to why we should incorporate universal design is to really think about the different ways in which we learn. This is their traditional graphic that talks about 3 different learning networks: the affective network, or the why of learning, looking at motivation and stimulation; the recognition network, or the what of learning, in terms specifically of how we present information to students and the different ways in which that information can be represented; and then the strategic network, or the how of learning, to really look at the ways in which we differentiate students' ability to express what they're learning. So here I'd like to share this graphic because this will also be available in the resources that we have put together in conjunction with Disability Services, the Online Learning and Site Lab, and also with the Lash Center for Teaching and Learning. Dr. Will Duffy has helped us compile some resources on online teaching and learning. This is a graphic that's in there. And what it does is it really helps us think about these 3 neural networks, but and also the intersectionality of work in each of these principles. So if you were to, let's say, follow the green column for engagement down, you'd be looking at, not only different options for recruiting interest in your students and trying to optimize relevance, or looking at giving them choice and enhancing their autonomy, you're also can be looking at ways in which you're building or sustaining their effort, their persistence, and their motivation, and perhaps also talking to them about ways in which they can be more effective learners and to work on their own self-regulation, study habits, and self-assessments or reflections. In all of this work and down that column, ideally, this approach is helping us look at students and teach them to become more purposeful and more motivated as learners. But you can also build across in this. We could do a whole workshop on looking at how we might help students internalize learning strategies by looking across the 3rd row at the bottom. So again, lots of science behind the way we learn, how we help students stay motivated to learn, and then how they can retain this information and more accurately share it back to us so that they can be assessed in what they're actually learning. So before I move into a little bit more with a few more examples, can everyone hear me okay? And do you have any questions for me? I think we're good.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Someone say yes. We have one less than an hour to really dive into a whole semester's worth of conversation. So as much as I will try to incorporate some UDL principles, I am going to be doing a lot of talking, which is not always the #1 approach. But please interrupt me if you need anything. So again, as we're talking about the why of learning, this affective network, we really want to think about how are we helping students? Are we motivating them? Are we perhaps giving them more project or problem-based learning opportunities, ways for them to develop their autonomy, and to really connect the lessons that you're breaking down in your units to the relevance not only of the material, the assignment, but also the course, how it may potentially help them in the long run, or also help them within the program that you're in. In terms of the what of learning, or the recognition network, one of the things we want to continually think about is different modalities. And again, whether you agree whether or not there are learning styles are real or if they're just learning differences and learning preferences, we're not specifically talking about disability here. We're talking about in particular moments with the type of lesson you're doing, people have strengths. They are going to be able to understand and process information by listening to it in some instances more effectively than by seeing it. But there may be other types of material or types of conversations or lessons that you're trying to teach where it will be the opposite for some students. Some students are very fluid in terms of their preferences depending on a variety of factors. So we want to think about even something as simple as instructions, and when we're taking our material, building it into a course space, how could we present that material in different ways? How could we going to be tempted to have everything in text because it's an online course, and of course there are many students who are not going to be able to maintain their focus to really process all of this information if it's only in text. What if you were able to type out the instructions, but also record yourself explaining the instructions the way you normally would in a face-to-face class, either just with audio or with a video? And then what if you were able to just upload and offer some examples of the work, the types of assignments that you're looking for students to submit, and examples of the traps that students fall into, oftentimes not necessarily understanding your assignment, especially if you have given it before. So examples of what you're not looking for, so that students might be able to experience that. And I know in all of this, sometimes we say, why? Why do I need to repeat myself? Why do I need to offer things in different modalities and represent in different ways? It's, you know, I'm so used to, when I went to school, it was the way I heard it once, and if someone missed it, they missed it, and they weren't paying attention. It's their fault, not mine. I'm here as the teacher, but that we are looking at trying to reframe that experience. By repeating information, we're not encouraging students to not be held accountable. We're offering it in different modalities, so there's more opportunity for people to process it, understand it, digest it, and essentially reduce opportunities for miscommunication and reduce barriers that could be interfering with things that sometimes are even beyond a student's control, especially in an online class during a pandemic, you know, during this quick shift. In this third learning network, the strategic network, again, we're thinking about the how of learning. So we're really thinking here, you've done all of this work to maintain a student's focus, to keep them engaged and motivated. You're offering different modalities of material, of instructions, of activities, and how are students being given an opportunity to be assessed? Are you giving them an opportunity to do some collaborative work, to be able to share their ideas with others? Are you checking in as you go and doing more formative assessments that allow for opportunity and feedback? Or are you feeling limited to only doing more summative assessments or just one assessment at the end? Do students have an opportunity to have self-assessments and reflections that they either share with you or only with themselves to help them gauge their self-regulation and their learning, and to learn how to give feedback to themselves and make improvements? And what about the actual assessments that you're using? Are they varied? Are you offering multiple measures of some type of assessment expression? Are you only using exams, only multiple choice exams? Or if it's an English class, are you only using essays? Are there other ways that students could talk to you, even though it's a writing course, about what you are asking them to learn, to have that opportunity to come full circle? So as we think about this foundation for universal design, the third goal of today is to really allow ourselves to think about how we can possibly incorporate some of these principles seamlessly without being overwhelmed. So one of the things we would ask is that as we try to apply these principles, that you might even just take one assignment or one activity from your class that you're very familiar with and encourage yourself to explore. Identify one of the principles of universal design, maybe something around representation or engagement or expression, and just one little piece what could you add and enhance? It doesn't necessarily mean it's a criticism to say that your activity is wrong or it's not working, but how could you attempt to reframe it and make it a little more inclusive, or just different, and see what the impact would be. Once you pick or identify this principle, we would ask that you do a little research, look at these different neural networks, look at some of the resources that are going to be shared with you at the end, or that you can really glean from your colleagues, because everyone's doing something to make things a little more inclusive and accessible online. And then compare the assignment or the activity that you normally do to what you might be able to modify it to, given this new principle, and be brave enough to try it out. As you try it out, we ask that you assess it, evaluate it, make sure you're still able to reach your objectives, but also ask for student feedback along the way. We find that oftentimes students can give you the best honest feedback. They may not use words to you like, you did a great job offering a new form of representation in that assignment, but they may say to their advisor, I really want to take a class with Denise DiMarzio again because she just made it fun, or I learned so much. And they may not be able to say why, but 9 times out of 10, it's because you've done something in that class that's universally designed and that's inclusive, and that really helped them maintain their motivation or help them learn, or maybe it was the first time that they actually were able to express what they learned in a way that didn't have as many barriers in another class. So in doing this, let's think about some traditional examples. We have 3 scenarios. Some traditional examples of things that we all incorporate into our courses, whether they be face-to-face or online, and then a slight shift in terms of how we might offer that with a more UDL approach. So a typical traditional approach might be, in this case, Dr. Smith awards students points for participation. And this type of participation might be measured by an individual's time spent speaking in the classroom, raising their hand, participating orally. Now, I would argue that with a more UDL approach, we could, and especially bring that into the online setting, we could try not to only assess and be drawn to the students who have that outgoing personality, who don't have anxiety, and who are really eager, without sometimes even really thinking through their answers, are really eager to show that they're ready to participate. Yes, that can be part of an excellent engaged behavior in a classroom, but could you first explain to students what else you might be looking for? Are there other ways to expand the definition of student engagement, preparation, and participation? And in the online setting, perhaps you have other opportunities. Perhaps they don't have to be the only one who's repeatedly answering everyone's discussion post, or in a synchronized session. Perhaps they don't have to upfront ask you a question or answer your questions, but maybe they could show you that they're prepared for class by sending you a probing question that they have, or to show you that they reviewed the material. Or after class, perhaps they could share and email you privately a reflection or a question, something that they have had time to think about, to ponder, and now they're prepared to ask it. Because not everyone is on the spot ready to ask the most probing question ever. And many times there are other students who need time to process the thoughts, pull their words together, maybe double check something, and maybe they might be anxious or nervous that they might say something wrong, so they're going to double check it to really let you know. And certainly we would adapt this into lots of different classes. If we're doing something that it does require, on the spot timed responses in a clinical setting, then we might need to scaffold to that long-term goal for all students, but not necessarily expect that in the first class of a particular program, the first time out in that assignment, that every student has to be able to answer or participate within the first 3 seconds. Another example on the screen for scenario number 2 is in a biology class, for example. Students might want to have notes on a weekly lecture, and they might be told that they have to write them themselves in the course while the teacher's lecturing, or they might be allowed to borrow them from another student after class. There are lots of other options we could offer a student, and this is not just for students with disabilities. yes, there are students with disabilities who physically cannot write notes quickly enough without recording it and being able to go back and listen. There are students who can't look up from their notebook to watch an interpreter and write at the same time. There are students who might not be able to hear you. They may not have assistive technology to take notes. But there are a lot of other students with processing challenges, or who might be bilingual, or who just really need to watch the board and listen to what you're saying and process it, and then go back and take down those notes. What if we also offered other options? What if, as you're designing your online class, instead of thinking that you need to reenact a video of every 1 hour and 15 minutes or 50 minutes or 2 hours and 40 minutes that you would normally be talking and engaging with a student, what if instead of recording that and uploading it into a long Zoom session, what if you were able to chunk the essence of some of your lessons so that they were very readable and digestible, and they were recorded, and a student could participate online in an asynchronized fashion, or if you're doing something synchronized or hybrid, that they would be present to you explaining it, but be able to go back and rewatch it. And you know, oftentimes, the more that we encourage faculty to record sessions or to post notes or to have things available, there's a fear that students will stop attending class, whether it's online or face-to-face, that they'll stop engaging because the work's there and they can just download it. But we have found that most students will not take the time to download those notes if they're not engaged in your class. The students who are going to look for those notes and the supplemental material that you're posting or the recordings that you post are the students who know that they need to re-listen to that, or they need that assistance, or that they're really devoted to breaking down the parts of the lecture that they weren't able to process or understand quickly during your explanation that they need to hear again. Other faculty will sometimes take turns, have students, as part of a homework assignment or of a project grade, take turns taking notes in class, so that a student knows, just like when I go to my VPLT meeting, I once a month am the note taker, and it's intentionally, you know, put there to say, instead of having someone else come in and take notes, I have to take turns, you know, being able to keep track of what we're talking about, who's talking about what, and being able to understand the process for taking notes so I can go back and read the minutes every week myself. We can do that with students. We can encourage them to have a responsibility to take notes for themselves and others, to go back and edit it, make it very comprehensive. Maybe, you know, have a standard where there's an example that they double check, or a links that are put in, and they submit it to you for a grade, and then you can have those notes posted. And if you're recording things, oftentimes there's hesitation, and I know the college is still working on their official recording policies, but we can have things recorded that are in our course space. And the more you offer students, the less they're going to be tempted to go rogue and record on their own at home. And you can also control where it is, where it's posted, that it's not to public domains, that it may not be necessarily downloadable, and it can also expire. You know, so you could say a particular session, if you feel like it's private or it has to do with this particular cohort, it doesn't have to stay in space past your semester. You know, you can have a little more control over it. And now, lastly, this traditional scenario deals with, you know, again, this third network of learning in terms of assessment. A very typical assessment would be a multiple choice test, timed at the end of the semester, something very summative in terms of approach, and very traditional, and sometimes very needed. You know, there is some level of, I want to know that you learned this, and I want to know that you remembered it, and I don't necessarily want to know that you looked it up, or that you are just guessing as you're answering questions or writing projects. However, there are so many other ways that we can assess a student. And from a UDL approach, we want to always back up in terms of our assessment design and think, what are we assessing? Oftentimes, especially those of us who enjoyed school and loved doing well on a test, as a teacher, you have that moment where you're bouncing out, writing the really good assessment, and we need to think, what are we measuring? Are we measuring someone's ability to manage their time, to manage their anxiety during a timed experience? Is that part of the class? It might be, but in the majority of classes, that's not an outcome. Are we measuring someone's ability to process really complicated English because we have written our multiple choice questions in a way that are hard to understand, or have lots of double negatives intentionally, or true falses with a double negative that then needs to be corrected in order to have full credit. You know, are we tripping people up with their language as opposed to really getting at the essence of the material? In addition to traditional quizzes and tests, are we offering opportunities for students who are not prone to that type of assessment to be able to show you've learned? Some students can really sit back and explain to you verbally what they've experienced, what they've learned, and pull in examples much more effectively than they can process a test question and be able to answer it. And then we all want to be able to take students' general knowledge and be able to apply it to a higher level of thinking and critical thinking, an application of the material so that it's really owned and applied. And then we all want to be able to offer examples sometimes for reflection. You know, here we have an active civic engagement department with service learning opportunities, and in some cases students can share more with you about how they've applied their learning from their class, your class, into their service learning opportunities than they may be able to when you probe them for a short answer on the test. So before I go into the next section, do you have any questions for me or anything that you would like to share or reflect on? Again, since I can't see the chat feature given this particular view.
Hey, Julie, this is Denise.
Hi there.
How are you? Julie, I'm going to be turning my English 102 to fully online for the first time this semester. And I was going to be putting my, the lecture I would normally do in person on some kind of visual, like PowerPoint with an audio, things like that. And then I wanted something that captions itself. So do you have any recommendations for something that would be the best in terms of like the visual capabilities plus audio plus it naturally transcribes itself? Do you have anything to recommend, anything to avoid? Thanks.
Yes, as a matter of fact, when I talk about accessibility, I'm going to talk a little bit about captions, but I'll talk about part of that now. It really is a struggle because the college has offered approaches to accessible course design organically over all of these years. So a lot of what individuals have been able to glean, I think, from the Site Lab and from our instructional designers has been very specific to specific questions. So we don't necessarily, we haven't had the approach that says, use this. This is what you have to use. This is the only thing you can use because there's, there's challenges to that. So I just want to frame, like, I wish I could say that we had this toolkit that the college said, here we're only going to offer you ADA compliant, really exceptional tools that you should pick from. I feel like they're in there. It's just there are a lot of other things that are in there. So sometimes we have to be careful what we choose. I think by moving to Zoom, the colleges, we are making some choices that give more opportunities for online platforms that are even more accessible. And part of the silver lining to the pandemic is highlighting some of the challenges that we've had. But just with that little like asterisk caveat, traditionally the Site Lab has always recommended creating your own YouTube channel that's private and relying on the auto captioning software and then being able to go in and edit it. And it sounds like so odd and basic, but it's still the most reliable way to be able to control your own media that you're creating. And you can do that even with with a PowerPoint so that you're screen sharing and talking over it and that it's there. The auto captioning is much better than it used to be. It doesn't mean you would just let it be. You would still go back and listen to it, watch it, and make sure it's accurate. But you could very easily correct it in the moment because it's fresh. And if you don't, and you wait for a semester where all of a sudden you have a deaf student, you might find yourself spending hours. Because even our captionists, C-print captionists who are trained, when they go to correct someone and try to help someone with a video, it takes them so long because it's not their material. You also might find that if you're reading off of a transcript, some people, I can't do this, but lots of people prefer to have their notes written out verbatim. You can just upload that right into the transcript, the auto notes feature, and save some editing time as well. VoiceThread is the other option that is very good in terms of its auto captioning feature, and the college does encourage individuals to use it. but I wouldn't go rogue with too many other things. There are some nice accessibility pieces in PowerPoint, and I've been trying to play with them, but a lot of times captioning is available, but only if you're paying an outsourced company or you're going through about 70 steps to get them uploaded in. So I wouldn't necessarily explore that yet, but I would say VoiceThread, YouTube, and we have found that if you're comfortable with it, a lot of faculty aren't using it as much as the professional staff, but Teams in Microsoft, because we have all these Microsoft products, Teams actually has excellent auto captioning. So if you were to create a workshop or a session in Teams just with yourself and relied on the auto captioning there, it's very well done, and it's searchable when you say you can save the transcript and whatnot. But those would be the 3 options that the college would recommend. And I'll get back to you on Zoom once I see the contract that's negotiated to make sure the captioning's in there. It should be, but I can't say it's there yet because it's not ready. But thank you for asking these.
Thank you, Julie.
So one of the things I want to make sure we do in this workshop is not feel like we're not talking about anything that's new. We're just reframing some of the conversations we've had for years. And about maybe 2013 or so, when I was working as a learning specialist just with deaf and hard of hearing students, we were always trying to pull together a really succinct list of communication tips for faculty and staff when they had an interpreter in the room or a captionist, or they were trying to talk to someone who used only hearing aids, and to just try to summarize like the top 10 things you should try to think of to do. And as we did that, and some of my colleagues were working on their own universal design tip sheets, we realized, this is all the same material. This is the essence of universal design, effective communication. So we worked with one of our hard of hearing students to develop this acronym called PEACE, and we've attached probably thousands of PEACE tip sheets that were just homegrown to our accommodation plans over the years. But I'd like to take this concept, which is just another slant on UDL, and pull it into our online setting as another reminder. So when we're thinking about communication, we believe that there are 5 components, and the first being pace. We are all busy. We're in New England. We all talk very quickly, and we have 16 weeks to jam in all of this material. And now, in pivoting to online, we want to think about what also exacerbates the pace of this. So we have technical glitches, and students are having maybe their own challenges, but essentially we still have these 16 weeks to really think about how we can pace learning in the online setting. So, some of this idea of pace typically I would talk about in the classroom, making sure that one person's talking at a time, or that you have you're really facilitating group conversation and helping with that. We of course need to think about how are we going to do that in our online setting. So if you're doing something that's synchronized, or having an online office hour where more than one student joins, how do you facilitate that pace so that one person can talk at a time, or that someone has a question versus a comment? Being mindful of it. I'm not saying there's one particular answer as to how to do it, but being mindful of it and acknowledging your attempt to do it can make a difference. I would also have us think, though, about the pace of the whole semester now. And as you control and design your online space, please encourage yourself. I encourage you, and I ask you to think about leaving your weeks open. Many faculty prefer not to, and when the deadlines close, the week closes, and the next week doesn't open until a certain time, and it's very rigid and predictable, which can be useful. But for many students that are struggling with deadlines, whether you agree to rigid or flexible deadlines, they may still benefit from needing to go back and look at the material from the week before, finish some of those activities, and to help fill in gaps and help with their scaffolding. Other students really need to be able to look through the material coming up to be able to predict how long an assignment's going to take for them, or to be able to help pace out their own pace. And then we just don't know. There's so many more factors affecting right now during COVID, affecting students' ability to really work through a class at a more particular rate. There are going to be weeks where people are in self-quarantine. There are going to be weeks where family members are ill, things that are unpredicted. So the more flexibility we can offer students to help them pace out a semester, even if they're falling behind to catch up, the more inclusive I would suggest that we are working to reduce barriers for them, but still allowing them to maintain the standard of your class. the E, so peace, P-E-A-C-E, if we think about the E as environment, now in a face-to-face class, I would think more about our lighting, you know, the blinds that might be broken that can't seem to block the glare from the sun, or the background noise in the hallway, and you know where people are sitting and whatnot, and you will still think about that in some of your hybrid classes. But in the online setting, you know, what can we do to control the environment? And one of the things I think we should think about is how we're intentionally designing the course space. And there's this pressure sometimes to make it pretty and jazzy and to have like all of this wild video and like engaging material. While yes, we want to make things engaging, the more simple and linear you can create the space and predictable, the better. I think about some of our students who have gone from taking 4 or 5 classes face-to-face to suddenly taking 4 to 5 classes online, and how much, these are not students with disabilities, how much they're struggling with their organization because every class is organized so differently online. And every class opens up their phone on a different day, the assignments are due on a different day. Even you can just control the environment of your course to be relatively predictable and speak to the Blackboard calendar, students would appreciate that. Now, if your course also has not just Blackboard as a learning management system, but it also uses Pearson or another platform that guides the assignments and the due dates, if you could get those assignments to also speak to Blackboard, even though it might be a little more work, it would help students be able to track, you know, what is due, what is left. And sometimes the simplest kind of checklist around the design of your class may not seem really jazzy, but it helps students see, what am I working on, what's due, what have I completed, what's going over the course of, like, this is a 3-week assignment, you know, maybe I've drafted my rough draft here, but I'm still editing my first major paper, and that's due here. How can you help students see that in one place, especially given the number of classes that they have, and this may not be their preferred, you know, environment. We also want to think about the A of peace, which is accessibility. And one of the article that we're putting in Bristol Weekly Tuesday in our disability dialogue forum is talking about, again, shared responsibility for inclusion and accessibility. So this isn't really the job of disability services, and this is not just the job of the student in your classroom who might have an access need. We all share in this idea of, you know, how can I make things more accessible, and that's really the essence of universal design. One of the simplest things to think about, but yet sometimes the most complicated, is captioning. And one of the things I want you to think about related to captioning is that they say that about 80% of individuals who turn on the captions, especially in these Blackboard classes, are not deaf or hard of hearing. They're students who like seeing captions, who find it helpful to them because of their being bilingual or trilingual, and the vocabulary and seeing the words helps them. They're students who have maybe auditory processing issues, who really understand better by having the captions on than just listening. There are students who you may not realize it, but your videos may not be clear. You know, sometimes, no matter how loud, the louder you turn something up, the more the more distorted it gets, depending on what they're listening on. The captions can help them. It could be students who are studying in the middle of the night and don't have earbuds and are trying not to wake up the people around them. And many students are used to seeing this type of multimodality. They're gaming and they see with words and images, and they have YouTube on at the same time, and there's all this stuff coming at them. It helps them with their focus. They prefer to have captions on. So by taking the time up front, it is more work, but it's important work to have things captioned accurately. Not only are you meeting the needs of a range of students, you're also prepared for that one deaf student that you will have this semester or next semester who absolutely can't access the material unless it's captioned. And these things are not easily captioned afterwards. Retrofitting captioning is a nightmare. And if you're picking material, you know, out in the universe or even from a publisher and it's not captioned, we can't go in and fix that. All we can do is help create a transcript, which is just giving a student yet another thing to read out of context. They don't have the experience of seeing the material timestamped to the video. And then many times faculty get disappointed because you may be in love with that selection that you made last semester and you love that video and you think it helps really get the point across, but it's not accessible. So is it fair to keep that in your class if one or two of your students this semester can't get access to it? So in the beginning, what if we were to really make an effort to select material that's going to be accessible from a larger number of students? But like I mentioned to Denise, if you're making the video, even if it's a 1 minute, little description, when you're making the video, we have complete control over making sure it's captioned. We can simply upload it into YouTube and go in and correct that. And sometimes there's a misperception that that's not the role of a faculty member, but it actually is, and it's not something that Bristol has made up. At other institutions, like that, it is part of a faculty's course design to then also create things that are accessible, and in collaboration with guidance and support from the site labs with the technical expertise and from disability services in terms of what might be needed. We will still try to outreach to you if we know that a deaf or hard of hearing student is registered for your class, to try to preempt if you have a course that's ready and we could look at it with the site lab, we might be able to predict challenges and then have time to address them before the semester starts. Sometimes people will call that accessibility audit through the site lab. I would have you be excited if there's time to do that. But just remember that deaf students are students, so they can add drop and change their schedule the last day of add drop. So sometimes there isn't time to do that, and that's why we want to be active as much as possible. But in terms of accessibility, one other thing I'd like you to see on this screen is just a simple contrast. There's a white background with gray letters, simple basic font, Arial, Verdana, things that don't have little tails, and sometimes they're not very pretty. Things written in crayon style or cursive are not readable to many people and are certainly going to have a more difficult time for a screen reader or software to read to a student that needs that type of assistive technology. And then it's a piece, the last two letters of the acronym are C and E. So looking at how we construct our messages and then how we expand them. And again, the more effectively we're communicating as faculty, the more effectively we're teaching, and the more students we're really reaching. So in terms of bringing this to the online setting, how are we building in opportunities to think about how we're structuring our communication, how to present the purpose of a lesson, to summarize it, to be able to wrap it up, to check in, and how are we doing that over time so that there's opportunities for students to really tap into that essence. And then in terms of expanding the material, how are we working on vocabulary? And I always like to think of it this way, that everything that we teach and that we talk about, we're excited about. It's part of our passion. So it's very easy for us to not only go too fast with our pace, but it's also easy for us to not break down acronyms more than the first time, that one time we mentioned it the first week, or to have it not referenced somewhere else. To think about the terms that we use and how loaded they are, and how we may need more culturally sensitive examples, more examples that fit different socioeconomic backgrounds, so that as we're teaching material in an intro to psychology class that makes so much sense to us because we've read it and we've seen it and we've seen students experience it, but many of our students have not. And the examples that we use, are they from our lives, or are they examples that we can try to pull from other students' lives that will become much more relevant and really help us to break down the language that we're using to open up more opportunities for inclusive design. So at this point, and again, I can't see you, which is part of my challenge, but I would really like to know, we have too many individuals to pair up in 10 minutes, but I'd like to know if you could share with us examples of things that you're already doing or thinking of doing, just like Denise mentioned in terms of intentionally making sure she has things captioned, that you feel fall in line with universal design. Like, what can you share from your learning and teaching? Anyone? Please join in.
So,
and I'm actually going to, I can't take it. I'm right here. I'm just going to, I'm going to come back out of the slide if you don't mind, because I want to see. Yes, interrupt me, please. Who's?
Can you hear me?
Is this Matthew?
Yes, it is.
What would you like to share?
Well, you made one key point about flexibility. When we went online last semester, I actually had a student who came down with COVID, and I really felt as though that I had to be flexible, very flexible with due dates. And so for me, that was one approach to, um, being accommodating.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And flexible due dates is such a hot topic, but
I know
right?
it's very tricky, but uh, I mean, I just I felt as though in his case, I had to be I had to be I had to differentiate from the course calendar a little bit. In all fairness to him, because let's face it, that was it was unprecedented.
Absolutely. And I think that there was a lot of encouragement from administration for faculty to be as flexible as possible, but then it depended on the course. So one of the things we do, from a disability services perspective, is that we try to talk about your course design. So flexible deadlines is not a standard accommodation that we would advocate for, but there are times in extreme situations, given a particular disability, especially if it fluctuates or if it's been exacerbated by something like the pandemic or pregnancy or something like that, that we would approach you and try to look at your course design. Is it possible that flexible deadlines could be incorporated here without fundamentally altering your course and your assessment? There are times when the answer is no, like the course is just too scaffolded and it's not reasonable. And there are times when the answer is yes, and you've already done that. Just like for any other student who approaches you and says, I really was in a car accident this weekend, and here's the reasons why I can get you this assignment next week instead of today. And we always work with students on trying proactive in that way.
Yeah. To echo what you had said, I mean, one of my objectives was not to have this student stress about getting his paper to me on time. That wasn't an objective on my syllabus. I wanted him to develop his writing skills. I teach ESOL. I'm part of the ESL department, and so in his case, I felt as though I felt the need to make an exception because of the fact that he came down with COVID.
Exactly. As a matter of fact, we're working on suggestions and guidelines for the fall with academic affairs, because we can't predict, but we want students to know what are the options, and we want faculty to know what are some suggestions and ideas as to how we can help meet the needs of students, but still maintain the standards and the fundamental pieces that are really important to your objectives in your individual classes. Like that's definitely essential. Do other people have things that you've already incorporated into your class, or that you're going to try to do, that falls in line with universal design?
Hey, Julie, it's Mike Geary.
Hi, Mike.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about what I did this past summer with my Home 160 class, because obviously we were working with a variety of different types of text. So there was some literature, some plays. They looked at episodes of TV series. They looked at documentaries. They had all these different things. And what I was doing was, rather than just do like traditional like questions and answers and discussion boards, I would mix and match. So one day they would do a journal entry, and the questions would be a little bit more related to either their reading experience or their learning experience or their experience with that particular type of narrative. Sometimes they would get multiple choice quizzes. Sometimes I would have them do other things. One of the things I did this past summer that I really enjoyed is I had them create a meme that reflected a major theme from one of the texts that they had read. And it was just sort of different ways that they could kind of approach the assignment. For one of the things, the class was the criminal literature and art. And one of the things I had them do was watch a couple of episodes of Scooby-Doo. And instead of having them do a discussion of that, I had them actually take the episode and rewrite it as if the crime would play out in the real world. And they could change it around significantly in terms of like the way it played out, but they had to change to keep the element of the crime being the same. The students have been having a great time with that, and it kind of kept them like, well, I wasn't quite sure what type of activity we would do next, but they were energized for the next assignment. And I have to say that doing that, getting away from sort of the mundane question and answer and discussion and all of that, while providing some of that, giving them other avenues for exploring the material, has been a lot of fun, and it's been challenging for me as an instructor to kind of keep coming up with some things that are new and creative, but I feel like that's one of the things that's really helped with the retention of my students in the class as well.
Oh, that's excellent. Excellent. I appreciate you sharing that, because sometimes, you know, faculty have said in these workshops, it's just having that permission to think outside the box a little more than they might have done before, or reworking a final exam and giving themselves permission to not have it be traditional. So I'm so glad you've been able to do things that are creative that way. Now, Kelly's sharing that she usually tries to create assignments of different types on the same topic to be sure she captures different learning styles. I agree. So sometimes just by giving that option, it's always amazing to me if you say to someone, you could write a 5-page paper, or you could develop a test for me, or you could do a presentation. How many people actually choose the paper because the other, you know, the other assignments would seem so fun and exciting to me as a, you know, with my personality, they're like, absolutely not. I'm not going to stand up and do a presentation and prepare, you know, a presentation on that. And it's so nice to give them that choice, and for them to really, you know, to look at their strengths. Excellent. Did anyone else want to share some feedback? Because I should show you our final slide. Absolutely. You know, triggers, Kelly was mentioning triggers. You know, I've seen that in psychology classes sometimes, where how useful it is to give an option, because sometimes we don't realize how powerful an assignment can be, what it can trigger, and if someone knows up front that they're, you know, that topic is, and that assignment is really going to be challenging for them, it takes a lot for a student to approach you and ask for an alternate assignment, whether they have a disability or not, which is a reasonable ask if it's seriously triggering their PTSD. But by offering options, it's great. It's absolutely, applying differentiation is key. And I'm just going to really quickly share the last few slides with you just so you can see them, and then tell you where to find them. And in the meantime, resources, but in the meantime, they're out there. So if you go into Access BCC and you click on the coronavirus tab, there's a page with lots of resources, and under academic affairs, there's actually the whole section for online teaching and learning resources. So in there is a folder for the UDL workshops, for resources on UDL, tech tools, and disability services. Some of it's a little conceptual like this, but most of it's a little more technical in terms of tips. So I'm assuming you can see this slide right now with the elephant in the room, which is how do we do all this very quickly. But realistically, and I'm just make this bigger for you, we really want you to be able to talk to us, you know, about how scary this can be, and if you're you know, feeling like it's just not in line with what you're trying to do in your class, see if we can approach other options with you, and to look at opportunities for flexibility for students and have a dialogue. So in doing that, we are hoping that you can really, you know, open up to asking yourselves and your colleagues, especially those of you who really are doing this already really well. I need you to talk to your colleagues who are nervous, and to tell them that it's working for you, and that, you know, how it's affecting students and including them, because they will listen to you, and that'll make such a difference for so many of our students. But, you know, looking through, like, what if I took the time limits off of one of my tests this semester? What would that do? And how can we address this just little by little? Would it, and see if there's a difference? And many people say there isn't. You know, what if I really decided that one of my that's not meant to be open book, but prep students ahead of time so that they really know what that means, you know, that they have a set amount of time to do the assignment, which means they really don't have time to look up the answers. You know, sometimes students still think that online classes means that they don't have to hold anything in their short-term memory, and to really ask yourself some of these leading questions. But we just want you to know that we realize that UDL is a process, and it's not something that any of us wake up and say, everything I do is universally designed today. It's taking one piece at a time to really, and one bite at a time to really make a difference. So we would encourage you to, look at your course, some of your assignments, just maybe one activity, or even just one conversation during an office hour, and how you approach it, and see if you can reframe it or incorporate a new principle. And we do have some homework for you. We suggest that you would watch one of these videos. We have one on UDL that's posted here on that website. We also have a range of resources in that folder that I told you about that Will also be sharing with you. And then I know you weren't able to meet Mike tonight, but we are both open to having you dialogue with us and share information. And feel free to share something in our disability dialogue forum that we have in Bristol Weekly every week. We want to engage in this conversation so that we can all learn from each other and really open up these opportunities. And I am going to end this slideshow, and if you have any other questions for me, I will stay in this room and chat with you. And in the meantime, if you can fill out the survey for Will and Mike so they can keep track of who's going to what trainings, that would be great. Again, Will should be emailing you the slides and the resources, but in the meantime, you can find them tonight right on that coronavirus page. So let me know if you have questions, and I will be here. Thank you so much for participating. I really appreciate everyone's focus and listening to my pace. Mary, did you have a question?